All right, welcome to a live studio audience. This is something we've always wanted, to have a live studio audience.
Jeff's
we
got
make
his
sure.
own sitcom now.
Normally,
I know
we
need like real clap. You didn't bring your clapping sign?
No, I don't have a soundboard. These
So
guys might though.
this is Bet the Process with Rufus Peabody and Jeff Ma and our special guest, Ted Knutson. So Ted, how's the Sloan conference been for you so far? What's been the highlight besides hanging out with me?
Dinner last night, definitely.
Really?
Yeah, dinner last night was awesome.
Yeah, we had a nice dinner last night at a place called Uni.
Not that you guys care about this. You care about many other things. Anyway,
We-
I saw Katie Nolan. That was pretty cool.
We talk about a lot of things that nobody cares about. on
I
this
had a nice
podcast.
dinner
It's
at
kind
Uni
of a
too.
typical
I wasn't
thing.
even at their table. I
It's
just
true.
happened to, by coincidence,
It's
be
like
at Uni at the adjacent table.
It was
And
kind of.
the
It was
problem is
actually
Jeff-
slightly creepy that you showed up at that there.
Well, I asked my waiter. I was like, "What did Jeff order?" Because I'm normally not used to being the one that orders for the table. And like when I go out to dinner with Jeff, he is that person, and he always orders really well. And I wanted to like.
it's called being a control freak.
yeah, well, it works.
So
Jeff, did you meet Saquon Barkley this weekend?
I met Saquon Barkley. Saquon Barkley turns out is a big fan of the movie 21 and said he's watched it a bunch of times, and he wants me to take him to Vegas with and go gamble with him, which is pretty cool. So I now have his phone number. I was actually going to tweet it out and dox him, but I figured that would be a bad idea. But yeah, no, I met Saquon Barkley. That's probably been the highlight of. I mean, there's so many amazing people here that you meet. It's just. You just sit in, there's like a speaker room, which is like the inside baseball thing. You just hang out in the speaker room, and like the people that walk through that speaker room it's incredible.
So we're not going to poll the audience, but raise your hand if you saw somebody you thought was pretty cool this weekend. Yeah, see? Exactly.
Well, they're looking at
Rufus didn't
three.
raise his hand, so that's
Oh.
like terrible.
Wait, I'm not in the audience.
Yeah, but you
Rufus,
can be part of the
What's your
crowd.
highlight, buddy?
What's my highlight?
Yeah.
Ooh, I don't know. I think Uni last night was probably up there. No, my highlight was yesterday when I had shown my fiance the Mike Leach wedding video before. I don't know if you guys have seen this, but when he, it's like the proper response when your fiance asks what your preferences are, and it's like, I don't care. Like, anyway, my fiance absolutely loved it, and I was like, I pointed out at the Liberty Hotel last night that Mike Leach was there, and she's like, we have to go talk to him about wedding advice. And so she goes up to him at the bar and like gets his attention, and Mike Leach just goes on talking for like 10 straight minutes on a monologue about
He's
wedding
like
planning.
a wonderful.
So he's
a
amazing.
wonderful human being. He's very nice. He came to our dinner last year that we did at the end of the conference.
He unfortunately has gone home. He won't be at the.
We should probably stop fanboying for a minute and like actually talk about something sports.
That's
betting
kind of what
related.
we do here, though, right? Like that's your whole podcast is inviting people on that you mostly like, and then you argue with them, and then Rufus, kind of is the nice
Rufus
guy.
says something like slightly confusing. But
Generally.
you understood that it was smart. What did you guys think of the panel, the sports betting panel?
I start with Rufus because he was live tweeting it.
I liked it. I thought it was an interesting, eclectic group, as you said, Jeff.
Eclectic was a good word for that. I had to look it up, but I think that was fitting.
I was hoping someone would ask Yas a little bit more about what their actual plan was.
He's about to
And
come on this
I'm
podcast.
I'm excited
so you can
about
ask
that. I
him
wanna
whatever
hear,
you
like,
want.
I mean, I've heard some stories from some bettors about some of the early issues they've had. I don't want to. I'll ask him when he comes on. But
So did you guys know about Jeffrey Yass at all? Like, did you get his background? Options trader, et cetera, et cetera.
Someone tweeted out, by the way, that there was no one on our panel that actually bet, and Jeffrey Yass definitely bets.
That's not true. Yeah.
Like he bets at a level that like probably none of those dipshits on Twitter are at.
I would say that SIG is probably reasonably frisky. Then they, European style before Passport, maybe like around the prop.
And just so everyone knows, Ted is like an insider. Ted worked for Pinnacle. Okay,
Ted's done everything.
He launched Pinnacle's live trading business in the NBA. So this is like an OG real sportsbook operator type.
Sure.
he closed up all the loops that Haralabab was exploiting.
We have had, yeah. So I
They hugged it
apologize
out. They hugged it out in the speaker room today. Though,
for
so.
those
Well, they
of
didn't
you.
hug it
Haralab's
out
here?
because that would be Corona non-sensitive. What?
Wait, he's here?
Haralabab?
No.
Who?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, Haralabab's here.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he was on a panel.
Oh, was it this morning?
No, it was yesterday.
Yeah,
I wasn't here in the
Way to
morning.
join the conversation.
that's all right. I have no idea where we were.
You were talking about Jeffrey Yass.
Oh yeah, so like SIG is so there are sports hedge funds, and I don't know how familiar you guys are with this. I've worked inside of one of them, and then at Pinnacle we dealt with a lot of inbounds from them. Their job is basically twofold: one, to model and predict the line, what the line should be, and then where there's value, you take as much as possible or as much as appropriate, depending on how much value there is there. And then the second part of that whole job is like finding a distributed sort of canon of liquidity. Like, where do we find all of the liquidity possible so that we can get down as much as we can on lines that have an edge? And for some small leagues or whatever, like the NBA is sort of small in worldwide volume. Maybe you're looking at 100, 200,000 a shot.
He told me that there was in that. So I think he bets primarily on Betfair, on the exchange, and he said that in the Bucks Lakers game last night there was $2 million traded,
right?
Of which they were roughly about 300K.
Yeah, and so like that's a matching thing. It's fine. I guess live betting's different than single shots, right? Is that an in running or a pre-game?
That was all in running.
Yeah. Okay. So that's like a totally different thing, because like in running is different sequence. So like it's like trying to get down. If the Bucks were say -3 or something like that, like how much can I get down pregame without costing myself a significant edge? And like that's not that big a deal. But how much can I get down on each individual time that I get the opportunity to bet, usually at breaks, like commercial breaks and stuff like that? Like every one of those is a different series of bets. So right. the volume calculations are weird. That's all. Anyway, for the Euros is coming up. You can probably get down like 1 to 2 million pounds a game in pregame. World Cup, like you're looking at
how much is that in
2
dollars?
to 5. Please? It's a really crappy exchange rate. So like 1.3x something. So
1.3 million on a game.
No, that I mean 2-3 times that.
Oh wow.
Yeah, World Cup action is the most insane. Like it's the closest we get to real stock market sort of liquidity on the trades. I'm real, whatever.
Wait, Ted, can I ask you a question? How efficient is the World Cup betting market relative to like regular
terrible
football?
The World Cup is so weird, but part of it is that the models are not as good. So like you don't have as high an N, you don't have like all the linkages between teams because it's internationals, right? So because of that, that means that the lines are more likely to be off. If you're pretty good at handicapping and have like a decent underlying math model, you can make an awful lot of money on the World Cup.
Is it kind of like the Super Bowl where you just have so many recreational bettors and people that don't normally betting that the lines, there just isn't enough sharp money to make the number efficient?
Yeah, I think that's generally true, but also just, when the line starts to be, when it starts out really wrong, it takes a lot more money and effort to move that to a right spot. And sometimes it'll never get there. So like it's actually the market's still
liquid. Why is the origination so wrong?
Again, because the models don't have reasonable amounts of accuracy, and because it's small n.
It's like all-star teams, right? Essentially, right?
What's that?
It's because you don't have. It's if you put like half the players from. Actually, half the players from. It took some players from the Philadelphia Eagles, some from the Redskins. Well, actually, scratch that. Nobody from the Redskins would make it to the football equivalent of the World Cup. But right, I mean, you basically have this team chemistry thing.
You're like
really
finding
know.
all these different ways to say all-star team. You just said all-star team.
Yeah. We'll flip it around. Like do college football, right? Like that's a line. Every year we never get that big of an N, and the smaller college teams have much less scrutiny, and you can't bet on them as big because they know that the lines are as wrong, but you never get to a point where.
But then where does the edge come from then? How do you get the edge if like no one has any sample size to build real models?
It's a combination. So it's a hybrid betting system where you have a better model than the bookie or whoever opened the lines. And then you're able to then use intelligence on top of it. Like say there are 2 or 3 injuries that came in, or this guy didn't get selected. For whatever reason, the English national team on the women's side does not select their best player. I don't know why. She's in the team, but Beth England still is not playing regularly. And so like you have to adapt based on that. So like team strength versus individual indicators.
Interesting. What else on the panel interested you?
In the sports betting panel?
Yeah, my panel.
See.
It's the only one we're talking about.
Your interaction with Matthew Berry seemed to, there seemed to be some fireworks there. He never answered your question.
He's been driving me crazy all
He never
weekend.
answered your question on if he could beat NFL player prop market.
He's told me he doesn't think he can. And the question I think that I was trying to get to, and I did not want it to become like me and Matthew just arguing because that's what it was about to become, was really about what responsibility the media has to actually like think about and And this is the same for financial markets, right? Like someone on CNBC that's like touting a stock, they have
Cramer?
some level. What's that?
Jim
like
Cramer?
Jim Cramer. Yeah, they have some responsibility. Now, Jeffrey Yass basically said, like, I don't care because he's not going to listen to that and he's going to use that information, potentially that inefficiency that might create and exploit that. But the average fan may follow some of this advice without fully knowing. And I guess the thing that I was trying to get to that they never really got to was anytime that something becomes very big, there's the scrutiny on that thing becomes much bigger also. And when that happens, things that were formerly okay are no longer okay. And so what are those things that won't be okay?
So, I mean, just an example of what you're saying, remember the DFS, the Bachelor contestant who won, or his wife won the Millionaire Maker, and I think a few years ago there wouldn't have been the scrutiny on that for the whole collusion thing, and now I guess because DFS is big, because of DraftKings' position in
How much do you think?
the
How much do you
developing
think the
sports betting
fact that they
market.
were Bachelor contestants was the factor in the scrutiny?
I have no idea, but
I mean, if they were
I
just a random couple, would have people have cared nearly as much?
Rufus, can you beat Bachelor contestants at NFL props?
can I? I don't know. I haven't tried.
Oh, come on. Grow a pair over there. Can you beat Matthew Berry at NFL props?
Ooh,
Oh,
no
that would be
comments.
good. I bet you could.
I like that. Beat the process.
Beat Barry.
Beat Barry.
Yeah, I think you could. You don't think you could?
I mean, is he here?
I mean, he's in the room like a couple doors over. I can text him and tell him to come over, and you can say it in front of his face.
Okay,
But
I think I could.
So my follow-up question.
I would. Okay, here's the thing. If you could bet on Matthew Berry or on Rufus for a set of props, which side would you take?
Wait, but
I would take Rufus all day.
This is not
But
close.
Matthew Berry said he has coaches. He gets information from assistant coaches, and
But listen,
I don't get that.
Half of his information, like we went through this together. Like he told me a bunch of the stories, and it's one of those cases where like half of it is totally useless, meaning like it's the wrong information, and half of the time it's great.
So that's a huge thing about modeling. Rufus and I have talked about at various times, like sorting through what matters and what doesn't is really important. Now, I think my follow-up question on the Matthew Berry thing was like, if the props are too vigged, how often can you beat those props anyway, right? Like if you're paying like 10%, 15% margin on every NFL prop, they've got to be really wrong in order for you to.
Well, actually, what's
10%, 15% margin.
Yeah. So like
Are there props with?
minus 10, minus 110 is like what, 5% vig, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So like
Roughly.
if you're looking at 120,
4
120, 130, 130.
Well, but Rufus
Is anybody
doesn't-
booking minus 120, minus 120, minus 130?
Yes, I'm sure
Anybody?
there are people.
Yeah.
But Rufus is running around Vegas finding like good value on these things.
Okay.
So he's doing that.
That's
thing.
why he's in such good shape.
Yeah, he's got good metabolism. So, wait. So I have a question for you guys. When they were talking about the concept of player props being like a good onboarding onto like from a fantasy player onto traditional sports betting. Do you guys believe that's true? I.e., is that like one way that you could actually grow more casual bettors is by having prop bets?
I think you want as big a funnel as possible, but I think that honestly, all right, so I was so angry at this for so long after UGA hit. I'm like, look at the newspaper. The spread is in every single newspaper. It's on ESPN every single weekend. People want to bet on that. Like, it's very simple. You guys all understand the spread. Yeah? You don't understand necessarily player props, but you all understand the spread. You all understand, like, I don't understand fantasy. Like, that's not my game. I get asked to do fantasy in English Premier League all the time. Like, it's a different set of rules. I don't care. We might be good at it. It's not relevant. But you guys get the spread and you get the money line. That's it. That's all you need to know, right? So, like, I'm happy to bet on that. You don't need any special training wheels. You might need things that are more interesting, and you need to pay the lowest price you can. You need to actually feel like, hey, I can win these once in a while. And if you hit 52.5 at minus 110, like you're going to break even. You do a little bit better than that. And over your history, you'll be fine. And plenty of you can do that if they offer that to you. The challenge right now that didn't get hit on this panel, but Yas is surely pushing for it, is, hey, give us something that we can beat, right? Like, give us something that seems like it's a fair thing so that people aren't getting gouged by the bookies.
But the thing with the whole gist of that panel, and it's my fault because I'm the one that designed the questions and whatnot, is it's not the direction the U.S. is going.
No.
Right? The U.S. is going much more, in 10 years, I see the market being it's much more likely that it's just a completely recreational market than it is supporting any people like Jeffrey Yass.
Well, Yas seemed pretty optimistic that actually it could turn into sort of a bigger market with an exchange model. I mean, I liked, he
He
mentioned
didn't have like evidence for that.
No,
he
but-
basically was just like, this is what it should be. It's not that he believed that there was a path to that.
The
There's
exchange model
there's
is
no, there's no
politically-
path to it right now.
No, there's no path.
Because,
there,
because of the
there
Wire
isn't
Act.
right. There's nothing on the table right now. But I think at some point the Wire Act will be looked at again, and because there's just too much money for them not to look at it.
But the exchange model is the politically efficient way of saying we need to have low vig sports betting, right? And it's easy to say, oh yeah, it's between two bettors. No, it's fucking not, people. It's between a market maker that probably has a giant bankroll and somebody who wants to bet at the cheapest price possible. That's how that actually works. I don't know if anybody knows that, but that's the reality of it. But because all of the Europeans came over here, have spent a lot of money marketing, a lot of money, lobbying to have things the way they want, and because there's no centralized set of regulations, we're in a spot where the customer seems like they're going to be in trouble because like the Europeans are going to get their way, or the European sort of bookie owners. That is what's happening.
Well, but I think eventually over time, right, some of the incumbents are going to lose and innovation's going to, I think over time we're going to get some innovation.
That is a remarkably naive opinion. I do not see that at all, and I see that's been pushed out in Europe. Like the tax regulations do not allow you to do that. I don't see there's any indicator outside of like American ingenuity that suggests that that will be the case.
You've lived in
how are you
England
defining
too long.
innovation?
Yeah,
I'm
and
jaded.
No,
Ted.
Or the other way.
I
Maybe
existed in like the Asian betting sphere, so like I know what it could be, but I don't see any indicators that it'll get there.
But what do you mean by innovation in this case? Like more markets, more
Are we
different
talking?
products?
Jeff is talking about.
I don't know.
Well,
I mean, innovation is
so,
this big word, but I don't know what
I
it means
mean-
in this context.
You can look it up. It's not that big.
How about cognitive?
Innovation. So there's. I'm probably mixing two things up. Okay, that's fair. So on the one hand, I agree with you that the path that we're going down right now is towards like high margin recreational betting, right? The people that are getting the skins, sitting with Kip Levin from FanDuel and talking to the William Hill guys about like how big their hold percentage is. It's not going towards a world where they want to do what you said that they should be doing, which is like, give me something I should beat. And this is always something that's kind of like at the core of like arguments that Rufus and I have, because, I came from a world where I got banned playing blackjack, and like, it didn't seem fair, but it was like, I was not, living up to their end of the expectation, which was that I was paying entertainment money, and so I wasn't paying that, and so they didn't want to allow me to play blackjack anymore. And I just had to kind of accept that casinos weren't there for me to make money in, they were there for them to make money in. And likewise, the sports books are not designed for sports bettors to make money.
Hang
They're-
on, that's not true. These sports books are not designed for that.
But
wait.
anyone is not, because the sports book has to make money somehow. Even if it's an exchange, there's not value being created by betting. There's value actually that you're always going to be extracting value out of that money, out of that.
Well, somehow
Right.
you
But
have to
right
get-
now, what we have is not economically efficient. I mean, let's say Floyd Mayweather wants to bet $1 million with me at -110. And I can, I don't want $1 million position. I want a $500,000 position. I go and I offer somebody else $500,000 at like +107 or something, right? And then like in that situation, if I'm the book, like I'm actually making I'm giving a bet that's much better than market price to somebody else, but it's I'm making money on that though, and so why shouldn't I take that big bet? Like if there's somebody that's willing to take the other side there,
But if
I mean,
there's someone that's willing to take it at -110 also, why would you? You know what I'm saying? Like you're saying like out of the goodness of their heart, they should just take a little bit of edge versus a lot of edge when the classic model right now allows them to take a lot of edge.
No, right. But my point is, let's say they don't. It's risk tolerance. Let's say they don't want $1 million position here. They only want a $500,000 position. They can still take $1 million bet and just offload that risk and still be making money by doing so.
I think that Jeffrey S. will probably cover it himself, but I think that his point is that if this operated more like a financial market, it would be, one, there's money in it, and if you get enough volume, like there's a lot. And I can tell you, like that $1 trillion a year idea is if there's liquidity. And it gets a lot faster to do that if you're allowed to take bigger bets which obviously, Pinnacle liquidity was quite different than I'm sure what you see with all of these guys. But Bet365 liquidity is absolutely massive because they're worldwide. They've done this for a very long time. They have connections that people don't really talk about that are on the gray market, but yeah.
But I mean, that's the interesting one, right? Like Bet365 coming into this.
What have I said?
No, but them coming in, they got licensed in New Jersey, right?
I don't know how.
Well, I mean, they got licensed in New Jersey,
Yeah.
and that's enough that you need to know that they're probably going to be able to enter the U.S. market for however.
So they're going to offer a very good recreational product, but they're not going to offer you guys what they were forced to offer in Asia because of market conditions at the time.
Okay. So is it just bleak? I mean, should any of these people that want to become professional sports bettors, should they just not?
I think that it's a really challenging space, and I as much as I would
Should Rufus try to get a real job?
I'm not sure Rufus is cut out for a real job.
That's a good point.
He doesn't think he's marketable for a real job. We've had this we've had this meta conversation on the podcast. It's very sad.
How about
Do
you?
we have to go here again?
What? How about me? What do you mean?
Real
Yeah, what's your
jobs.
job? Your job is Bet the Process co-host,
Co-host.
which I really like that. Like,
that's my moniker. This
I don't.
whole-
My thing
this whole
doesn't say
thing.
Bet the Process.
Mine doesn't either. Doesn't actually have anything beyond just your name.
So before you guys walked in, before Jeff walked in late, somebody asked about like how do the bookies and/or the hedge funds like get rolling on the models, and where do they get the information and the data and stuff like that. And the fact of the matter is, it's kind of funny. Like the teams are doing the same thing, right? Like if you're a modeler for bookies, or if you're a modeler for the teams, like you're usually using the same sort of data. The bookies will incorporate more external market information. Like what we do whenever we came to a new sport was try to build a market implied model. So you look at all of the closing gambling lines and then you build interlinkages between them and you try and figure out sort of what the team ratings look like there. But it's mostly based off of the same types of information. I do wonder if any of the teams out there are using gambling information because often that's going to be one of the sharpest indicators as to actual team strength and do they line up against that. But it's, the data space and what the teams want to do.
Wait, this is like self-serving.
No, I'm telling you, I'm not talking about. I don't own a data company or anything. No, but no, it was an actual question. Somebody wanted to know about that, and really, you want the best data possible to model on either side of that space because you want to be more accurate. You want to understand how the game works better, and you want to know what is important in there so that reflects in your predictions.
So this is like a really good macro conversation. Like ultimately, like the value, I always say like the best place to create a competitive moat in analytics is by having just better data than anyone else. Like don't worry about models, blah, blah, blah. If you just have better data or data that no one else has, that's the start.
Like
And-
Saquon Barkley's phone number in your phone.
Well, no, but like what I find interesting is like this whole coronavirus thing, not to be too meta on this thing, but it's the classic example of like the inputs in the system being really bad.
Yeah.
Right? Like we don't have any real good data to understand what the F is going on. So people are just freaked out. And, if it is being underdiagnosed, which I think clearly it is, there's two things. One, more people have it. And two, the mortality rate is lower.
Mortality rate's lower, but it's also a lot more places.
Yeah.
Yeah. And right now, they're not even, the CDC isn't reporting the number of tests, so we don't actually know the denominator. We know how many people have tested positive out of the people that have been tested, but we don't know how many people have been tested.
Yeah. So
We just know it's
Data.
not a lot.
yeah,
important.
data is important. So
For
maybe start a data company.
Pandemics or sports betting or any of that.
We should ask when Jeffrey Yass just walked in and he's going to actually replace Ted in a couple minutes. But we'll have to ask him where he gets his data.
That's true.
Maybe he could become a new customer of StatsBomb.
No. He just bets on exchanges. It's fine.
So
Wait, I want to ask Ted a question really quickly. Ted, what are you doing to hedge yourself against the coronavirus risk here? Like, what happens to StatsBomb if football matches are canceled?
So it's basically taken me a pandemic in order to start worrying about the business again because like we've had a really good trajectory and we've been picking up customers like crazy, but we're also like, especially in the soccer space, teams are still, we're optional budget, right? Maybe they're making an investment, but they're not 100% sure that like we're useful. And these teams, much like almost every other business that's out there right now, are facing cash flow issues in the future if they can't have match day income. And all of our customers outside of the gamblers are basically, it's important for them to have butts in the seats every single day. So it's a challenging space, and I have lots of concerns.
all right.
Okay.
You got anything else? Parting words? Jeffrey, you want to come join us up here?
Come on up. Thanks for listening, and it's always good to see you guys.
It's good to see you too.
Thanks, Ted. to be coronavirus safe here.
I think Jeffrey's a member of Marion. Aren't you a member of Marion?
Golf, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah, his fiance is
It's
a member there.
Let's play.
Definitely.
All right, now we welcome in Jeffrey Yass, who is the founder of SIG Susquehanna. We just did a panel together here at Sloan around sports betting, where Jeffrey was talking a lot about the need for an exchange. And I think it was very provocative, at least for me and for others. What was there anything that you didn't get a chance to say on that panel that you wish you had been able to say?
A little bit I wanted to add, the Minnow Shark problem that Daily Fantasy has. There are some games like poker where if you're a bad player, you're going to lose a lot of money fast. That's what happened to the minnows. If you're a terrible craps player, you're about the same as the world's best craps player. Everybody loses 0.5% or whatever. There's some bets that are a little bit worse, but for the most part.
I mean, I don't know if
That's
I
not what you
agree
told
with
me,
that.
Jeff.
There's some really bad craps players, like people that play the field or play tons of like the horn, or like you can just sit and bet pass line and take max odds,
Yeah.
and that's a very close to even game, right?
Right. Yeah.
And even people that don't take max odds, it just kills me. Like it's just whatever. Anyways,
But
you
yeah.
hit a hot button.
Okay,
You hit a hot
no,
button.
there's some variance in craft. I can teach anyone to be the world's greatest crafts player in one sentence. So if you want to learn, it's an easy game. You can't win, but you can lose at a slow rate.
And you
Poker,
get comps, and
You can almost-
it's a fine way to spend time in Vegas.
I'm not.
I feel dumb. I don't think it's that
craps.
easy. Jeff has to reteach me the rules every time we play craps together.
That's because you don't pay attention.
But at poker, it would take you a long time before you're not going to be losing a ton of money. If there were exchanges in sports betting and the markets were as tight as I would expect them to be, if you look at the markets on Matchbook or Betfair today, they're 0.5%, 1% wide. Doesn't matter how little you know, you can't lose more than 0.5% or 1%. The smartest guy and the dumbest guy are going to get approximately the same price. So you're protected by the pros who make the price right. So you get your entertainment and you don't have to know anything. While in fantasy, if you want your entertainment and you don't know what you're doing, you could be losing 20 or 30% on your tickets. And that's what exchanges and that's what markets do for people. I think of the people who invest in the stock market. If you listen to financial economists and you just bought a broad, diversified portfolio of stocks, and you did it in an index fund that charged, essentially no fees, you've made a ton of money over the last, 20, 30, 40 years, and you have absolutely no knowledge of what you're buying. You don't know the 500 stocks that you're buying, but the market gives you that fair deal because professional speculators are battling it out in each of those stocks. So when you actually go to buy those stocks, you're getting a fair price because it's battled out by speculators. So all of investing is based on the fact that you don't have to know anything about the stock market to turn it into a good bet. And in sports betting, we're never going to be able to turn it into a good bet, but we can turn it into an almost fair bet. And it doesn't matter, even if you know nothing, you're going to be protected.
But
Okay, 'cause you're saying-
isn't that analogy? I mean, and you did make the distinction, but I think it's important to make that distinction, which is that in the stock market, there's value creation. So it's like a positive EV situation to buy into it, whereas
Right.
sports betting is the opposite, right?
Well, it depends. In a dollar sense, yeah, the stock market is positive EV. The sports betting is a zero-sum game, but you got to count the entertainment value. I mean, if I'm betting $100 on a game and it costs me 50 cents or $1, and I get 3 hours of thrills, that's a fantastic
do
return.
you sweat games?
Oh yeah.
I love it.
Oh yeah.
So you'll
Do you have
know-
any money
do
on
you-
the golf
do you
tournament
know,
right now?
Do you know at any given point everything that you guys have?
Sometimes I know, and sometimes I don't, and then I'll sweat it in if I know what we have.
How do you avoid knowing?
I don't ask. My sons do it, and they know it aggravates me when they lose. They try not to tell me a lot of times what we actually have.
That's
But like tomorrow's golf, I'll say, who do we got? If I'm home watching.
This is like in those magazines when they're like celebrities. They're just like us. Like Jeffrey Yass, he's just like us. He sweats games also. Yeah, that's good to know.
So,
And when you have the Phoenix Portland game and you're sweating it at 1 o'clock in the morning, you're sick.
I mean those types what's the worst? I always think about that. What's the worst thing to tell someone that you're sweating? You know, they're like when you know, my wife comes by and sees me watching like some, you know, MAAC game where there's like literally 7 people in the stands. She's like, well, why are you watching this? So still hasn't figured it out. But were you a question?
I was going to ask Jeffrey, how did you get started with SIG Group in Susquehanna? Like, how did you go about building out what you guys are doing right now? And
How is that, with Susquehanna or the sports betting part?
no, the sports betting part of it.
Well, once we thought that the Supreme Court would overturn the PASPA, we saw how there'd be a tremendous opportunity in the United States. We saw how big the market caps of stocks were in Europe, the big bookmakers, you know, particularly Betfair and stuff. And we said, well, the United States would be much, much bigger. It's a natural extension of our business. It's market making, it's buying and selling, it's mathematical, it's trying to figure it out. And, you know, we also have the advantage that, you know, we have a lot of guys who love sports at Susquehanna.
And you guys are just a partnership or something? Like,
Yeah.
So you didn't have a board or anything to have
We have
to
no
go by.
outside
Yeah,
money.
so you just could make that decision.
We can do it, yeah.
How much, like legal, how much did you have to think about things legally and structuring it and make sure that it was all compliant?
Yeah, that was a bit, you know, in Dublin, it's pretty easy. We're still working through it in the United States. It's a gigantic hassle. And we're not licensed yet. We're waiting to be licensed and stuff, so.
What do you have to be? You have to be licensed as a fund?
We have to be licensed as like a betting entity, and we're possibly going to buy some skins also. So you got to go through the gaming boards and stuff, you know.
So
Well,
is-
that's news right there. They're gonna buy some skins. I like.
Yeah.
That. I like that we're breaking news on our podcast. In that case, if you buy skins, you're basically gonna do kind of like trade from within those skins.
Yeah.
I mean,
That's
are
pretty
you
cool.
mostly seeding markets right now, like Betfair?
But see, this is
and-
the answer now. Like if he buys a bunch of skins, there's gonna be liquidity for you to bet, and you don't
Yeah.
have to get a real job.
Sounds good.
Yeah, there we go.
Well,
Perfect.
not if the
I can
wire
get behind that.
still there. It's only in one state.
Ooh. Yeah?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but how much do you pay?
What's that?
How do you? So that's a good question though. Like, so actually, Susquehanna itself is the pioneers in options trading, right? They are, you know, and options trading is all about sort of estimating volatility, edge, blah blah. What, you know, when you were sort of building that out, you know, this is even before there was like this real quant movement, right? So you guys were at the cutting edge before there wasn't even, the term data scientist wasn't even a thing at that point, right? So how did you guys look to recruit out your team, and like what were the things, the attributes you looked for?
Well, we look for what people were, you know, mathematically inclined. And before you become a trader at Susquehanna, you learn how to play poker. So we have a couple of months training in poker, because we think the analogy between being a poker player and a trader, the same kind of decision-making theory, is very similar. So we just don't want to take some brilliant mathematician, put him and let him trade and be naive and not realize what's going on in the marketplace. So we found that poker was the best way to you know.
So did you have?
Wait,
did
my
you have
my
them play-
experience with poker players is that they're generally losing bettors, and I've gotten a lot of accounts that I've been able to keep a lot longer than I would have otherwise, because poker players were betting on these accounts before.
Yeah. It's remarkable that a guy who grinds out at poker and is a pro could go out and lose money betting sports, but it happens.
I think
this is
poker
the
players
classic-
are much more gamblers than sports bettors.
That's, I mean, it's interesting though. Like, so what do you think the skill set that you saw, or that what were you hoping to develop most of? So you would have them literally play poker with each other,
Yeah.
like Hold'em or what, or
It
variety
became-
games.
It started out as 7-card stud, that's how, but then Hold'em became the game, so now it's Hold'em.
And so would you have them play with their own money? Would you stake them?
No, they wouldn't have to lose their own money. We would play, and then at the end of the hand, we turn over the cards and say, what were you thinking? Explain your strategy. Why'd you make this move? Why'd you not make this move? And they had to articulate it and break it down and say, I thought there was X% chance of this, so therefore this play was correct. And
So it was a lot about probabilities then.
yeah, it was
thought
all about
process.
probabilities.
Got it. Interesting. So what were some other things you did? Poker. How long did you do the poker thing for?
Still do it. You know, we have the great Bill Chen here today. He wrote the Mathematics of Poker, the leading poker book for mathematicians in the world. All right. and he teaches the kids how to play poker.
Wow, that's cool. So what did you find, like what were some attributes that you found were leading indicators for who would be good traders besides the poker stuff?
We really liked people who had a little bit of an entrepreneurial streak to them. Like they made some money at fantasy, or they figured out some thing on their own.
So they found a hole.
They found a hole somewhere, and
Yeah.
they figured, and they, and it wasn't certain, but they were clever enough to, to find it, and that's the way they were thinking. We always, ask the question, if you were watching a football game and you didn't smash your foot into the TV set when your team didn't go for it on 4th and 1, if you did, if you were frustrated by that, then you're the kind of guy we want. So who was watching a game and realized this is a probabilistic game and these coaches are making these horrible decisions. If that aggravates you, we like that.
That's awesome. Other things? How about in terms of as you guys started to build into the sports betting business, how did you guys start to develop your edge there?
The only betting we do right now is out of Dublin, because we're not licensed in the
Right,
United
yeah.
States. So the models that we built were similar to option models that that you would build. And
You guys use Black Scholes?
well, not in this, but same concept.
Got it.
Yeah, but our major focus is on in-game betting, because we think the in-game betting is much more mathematical and much more counterintuitive what the odds are. The pregame stuff, you can be a sports fan, you just know it, but do you really know when your team's down by 6 in the second quarter of a basketball game what their chances have gone to? It's not obvious. It really can't be done by instinct or feel. So it has to be done by modeling, it has to be done by collecting the data, and we spend an enormous amount of time doing that.
So there's a lot of, you guys are obviously coming up with these in-game win probability models, but there's a lot of other groups out there doing that. And I think at some point, do you think it's going to be so efficient that basically everybody's got essentially the same number?
It will be pretty close, But the great thing about in-game is that when you really get to the end, you got to know sports. It's like that field goal kicker is not the same field goal. It's not like, from the 50-yard line, you're 62% to make it. It varies, on a lot. Is it cold? Is it windy? And not from the beginning of the game. Is it cold? Is it windy right now? And is that kicker a good 50-yard field goal kicker, or below average? So you really got to know the details. When Carson Wentz goes down in the Eagles playoff game, it's like, okay, what's the line now? The Eagles were 7-point underdogs or whatever to Seattle. Now he's down. You got to make that adjustment in 30 seconds. And you got to know sports to do that. There's no mathematician that's going to help you on that. And that's the part we love, that it's mathematically based, but you got to be a sports guy.
Yeah, you have to think about things in a certain way.
Yeah.
So are these simulation-based models that you build at this point then?
Mainly, yeah.
Especially for end-of-game scenarios, I feel like anything inference-based is going to be very difficult.
But the trader, it's the same way that we trade options at Susquehanna. We have a much more, it's not a black box. It's, we have the models, but the traders are crucial in overturning it when it doesn't make sense, or there's an unusual situation. It's the same thing in sports. This is what you thought before the game. Now all these things are happening. You got to make an adjustment, and most of those adjustments are subjective. So, you got to just make the right bet, and hopefully your judgment is better than the markets.
So in your time, I guess, trading out of Dublin, Sig, what has been the worst, what is one big mistake you've made? Where you've lost a lot of money on something and you said, and then afterwards you're like, well, we didn't, we thought something
right.
and we were incorrect.
We always underestimated the probability of a comeback. That the team that's way behind is more likely to win than our models said. The market knew it, our models didn't, and we were always, we got creamed in the Super Bowl when Kansas City came back, and that's the typical game we lose a lot of money on. That these long shots happen more often than they're supposed to, and we lost a lot to that, and we're recalibrating.
Wait, so why do you think that you underestimated that? You're just doing this on past data, right? So,
Jeff, I've had the same issue with my second half betting models. They typically underestimate the probability of a comeback.
But I thought you and I were talking about this, and we were talking about that there being theoretical edge there. So this is this is a classic modeling problem, right? Like when do you stay with the process, right? Or when do you go back and change things? And what has ultimately made you change things? So it certainly can't be the Super Bowl. It's got to be more than that.
Well, let's say, the model, just to be simplistic, just says a team up by 11 with 10 minutes to go wins 92% of the time. There aren't enough samples that the other team has Mahomes, and he's not, he's different. Same thing, Brady's probability of scoring from the 25-yard line with a 2-minute warning going 75 yards is dramatically different than any other quarterback, even Rodgers or Drew Brees. So,
But I would just guess, right, that the market would tend to overestimate the value of like a Mahomes and a Brady when really they're not. I mean, they're better obviously than the average quarterback, but are they going to be as good as the? Like that would actually be counterintuitive
right.
to me.
Well, that's what we thought, and that's how we lost. We're saying, well, okay, every casual bettor thinks Mahomes is going to do it, but he really can't. As it turns out, the casual bettor's instinct is pretty good. There's a lot of pros who are selling it down too, so you're competing with them. And as it turns out, it's unclear, but it turns out that just the guy who says Mahomes is going to do it is kind of right, and all the quantity guys are kind of wrong.
So you're saying that, for 2 games that both have a spread of -3 and a total of 51, there's a very different probability of one team coming back in a certain situation.
Absolutely, yeah. And every fan, if you're just a fan, you know that. If you're a mathematician, you may get it wrong.
So in your, what's interesting is like the subjective nature that your traders have to have, right? And so how do you test for that as it pertains specifically to sports? Because while there probably is some correlation to what they do as regular traders of options, there's also probably some differences, right? Like I would think that sports tends to be more emotional than potentially than options trading. It's probably pretty easy to be dispassionate in options trading, whereas when you're watching human beings do something, there's biases that are going to come in. So how do you try to?
That's a good point. It's not the same skill set. It's similar. You got to be a probabilistic thinker under uncertainty and react fast. But
have you had to fire any of the traders on the sports side or pull them away from that because they just weren't good at it?
Yeah.
And what were some reasons? Like, did you figure out why?
A little bit like this is my team. It's like you got emotional. This is your team, or a little bit you were naive, like you didn't realize that you're betting against somebody who's clearly a pro, and you got too confident in your opinion, and the other guy is smarter than you. All of sports betting, all of playing poker, all of options trading is making sure you're betting against someone you're smarter than, and you're not always smarter than the other guy. And if you're not asking yourself, am I the sucker, or am I the fish? And you get arrogant, you get crushed, and that happens to us all the time. And we have to, weed out the guys who are too arrogant.
So, what is the future life? Where do you see this going for you guys? Are you going to get licensed in the U.S.? Do you think that you will be trying to do this in all sports?
Yeah. What we're really hoping, as we talked about on the panel, is we're really hoping that the wire act goes away, which prevents interstate betting. There's one exchange, or there's exchanges, but like there is in Europe, and the markets are much, much tighter, and the volume is much, much greater. That's our hope, but we got to win some legislative battles to get there, and I don't know if we are or not.
Are you trying to influence those?
Not really. I mean, we just hope, that's why I'm talking here, to tell you people to get out there and, lobby your congressman. You have a right to bet, for the 1% VIG, not a 5% VIG.
Donate to the American Bettors Coalition, please.
The obvious
once
question,
we get started.
The obvious question that I think about is you're clearly a very successful man. You've built a really successful company. You've clearly profited from that. This motivation that you have around the sports stuff cannot be financially motivated.
Partially, but we call it an MFG. It's a mission from God. That the world deserves rational markets to have the great entertainment that sports betting could afford. We're uniquely qualified, we think, to get it there. And I expect to make a lot of money. I mean, this isn't a hobby, but even if I didn't, I would still do it because the world deserves to be able to bet sports in a reasonable manner.
I like
I
that.
like this guy.
MFG. Maybe he'll be part of your nonprofit that you want to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. He's trying to do a nonprofit. And
I think we've talked about it a lot.
To do what?
what? No, he hasn't talked about that much.
Not with Jeffrey, but it's called the American Bettors Coalition. What we want to do is give bettors a voice in the legal sports betting landscape. Right now, all these bills are being written by legislators that don't know squat about sports betting, and guess who's educating them? The operators, the data providers, the leagues, casinos, B2Bs, and bettors do not have a voice here. And so you see a lot of laws and bills passed that do not make any real sense. Like in New Hampshire, for example, DraftKings gets a monopoly there, and they're paying, I think, a 51% tax rate. Is that right?
Yeah.
And right, whereas next door in Vermont, I think there's going to be a bunch of different licenses and a lower tax rate. And what incentive is there to innovate in New Hampshire for DraftKings if they just have a captive audience? And honestly, people can go over to Vermont and I think that they thought with the 51% tax rate they'd be making more money. The state would, but I think for what we've seen with New Jersey and how successful they've been with a lower tax rate and a bunch of different skins, that a competitive marketplace is better for both consumers and for the states.
Well, I would say it's definitely better for the consumers, and I don't really care about the states,
But the states care. That's the thing.
Yeah, the states care about the states, but the people have to speak up and say, why does this act do I have to give money to the government? If I go to a movie, I don't have to pay the government. Why, if I bet a sports game, do I have to pay a different rate? And,
So I thought it was really interesting during you guys' panel, the discussion of how price discriminating bettors are. And that's kind of one thing that, I struggle with, the fact that especially with this nonprofit, we want to help out bettors, but a lot of times bettors don't really care if they're laying minus 120 or minus 115. How do you sort of reconcile that with sort of going towards this exchange model and being able to make an exchange friendly to the recreational bettor?
yeah, it's bizarre to us that people aren't as price sensitive as we would have guessed. But I would think that just over time, smart consumers are going to go to the exchange. It's going to be better and cheaper, and the consumers that aren't that concerned or price sensitive will just naturally gravitate there, and they'll benefit from the people who did the hard work of getting the exchanges set up and the smart consumer. Same way when you buy a car. I buy a car, I don't know how it works, but there's a lot of people that do, and they pressure the car companies to give me a good car, so I benefit off of them, even though I don't know how a car works. So the people will just notice, hey, their friend loses $1 on 100, not 5. And I think over time,
and I think
they'll
there'll be,
gravitate.
it's just like you were saying about like the culture of the society being innumerate versus not. Like, I think people just don't understand the math behind the difference between minus 120 or minus 110, and so they don't care. But I think over time, as they see the difference, right? It's just like when I forgot who it was. It was like an agent was talking about how he tries to get his athletes that he represents to understand the value of money. He'll often, like when they buy some watch or something, he'll tell them how much that'll be worth in 40 years, or that money would have been worth with compounding, right?
Yeah.
To make them understand, like they just paid $1.5 million for this watch in 10 years or 40 years or whatever. So,
But is there any precedent for consumers becoming more educated in a particular space?
yeah, I mean, just because you've been in this industry for so long, it doesn't mean that it's not incredibly nascent, right? Like,
Right.
There's a lot of people that have no idea about this, and it would be hard. Now, are they going to become smart? Maybe not, right? But are they going to become smarter than what they are right now? I would have to think so, right? Through some level of education and information. I mean, hey, Zach Leonsis is going to have a Genius Bar in his stadium, so there we go.
But there are bettors out there. It's not like these are all new bettors in America. I mean, most of these people were probably betting offshore with the local bookie.
I don't actually think that's true. I think there are new bettors. I think there are going to be new bettors. Like I've heard people say, like, "Oh yeah, I didn't do this before because it was too hard to do, or it felt wrong, it was illegal. There's more people. I think there will be new bettors.
So do you think it is intimidating? I mean, seeing, money lines and, which don't really make sense. Decimal odds make way more sense intuitively, but unfortunately I still think in terms of American odds and money lines. But I mean, it's not friendly to a new bettor. I mean, I remember when I went out to Vegas and I did an internship with Las Vegas Sports Consultants back in 2007, and I was having to translate. I was like, okay, minus 300, that's 75%, and I had to learn this. It was a new language I had to learn versus if, I could just bet and say, like 66% chance of winning. I mean, but the thing is, that's not what the experienced bettor wants. That's what, it's more friendly to the new bettor.
I mean, there's just a lot of reasons why sports betting was hard before, right? Like, it was illegal. You had to, like, get a bookie and, like...
Not in Las Vegas.
That's fine, but more people bet in Las Vegas than do in New York, right? Because it was legal.
Legal, yeah.
There's more people that would casually sports bet in Las Vegas and Nevada than there were in New York on a percentage basis.
Is that true?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, how can you
If you
say
say
that's not true? I don't know.
Because there's a lot of people in New York and
That's
a
why I
lot of
said a
bookies in New
percentage
York.
basis.
Okay,
I
on a
would
percent-
think that if to use a stock market example, when I first started, the markets were an eighth wide, so a stock would be $20 bid, offered at 20 and an eighth. And it was illegal to trade inside that. It was illegal to, say 2002, 2010. Entrepreneurs saw that as a ridiculous situation. They built exchanges when the technology got there, and now we all take it for granted that stocks are a penny wide. And the smart entrepreneurs did that, but the customers who didn't even know what was going on, didn't demand it, didn't realize how much they were losing, just benefited from it. There's no place in the world where the markets are an eighth wide anymore. They're all a penny wide. So it only takes a small number of entrepreneurs and smart customers to demand a better product and a better price, and then everybody else benefits from it. And I am hoping that's what happens here.
So I asked Aaron Kessler, who's the sportsbook director or co-director of the Golden Nugget, why there aren't any books that offer minus 107. And he said, if we offered minus 107, people would like it a lot less because they'd have to get out change.
Well, I think that might be a good one to end on. How about last story from you, Jeffrey? What is I've read some stuff about sort of having been a trader myself. I know the mentality. What's like the worst sweat you've ever had?
The worst sweat I've ever
Or
had.
either the worst sweat or the funniest prop bet you've ever proposed to someone.
I'm thinking of saying this. I don't know. I have bet sports. I have bet on my kids' sporting events.
All right, that sounds awesome. That's a great way to leave it.
That some might find inappropriate.
Did you win?
The big one I won. I've lost a lot of little ones, but the big one I won. Yeah.
All right, thanks for joining us, Jeffrey. Thanks for joining us, everyone.